Everybody, this is Dr. Ed. Y'all should all know him by now. If you don't, you're going to get this will be an entertaining conversation. Ed and I are completely full of crap, and Aaron's about half full of crap, so it's going to be awesome.
I've listened to just about everything that y'all have already put out on your channel.
Yeah.
With you, Ed, and it's fascinating. And I've read through some of the study, and I just want, ultimately, you know how everybody gets in the weeds. We talked about the arguments that are out there about the arrow stuff and whatever. Ultimately, I just want the bow hunting world to start to entertain testing this way.
Yeah.
It's like this doesn't make any sense to test any other way other than on animals and see what kind of terminal performance you're getting.
It's a lot.
Well, that's the only way you're going to get valid results.
Yes, yeah. I totally agree. You know, I just want more of the bow hunting community to embrace that ultimately. But yeah, I'm fascinated by all of it, especially the Natal study, because it's never been done other than that.
Right.
It's
so awesome. Yeah, it was the initial study, and it involved essentially smaller animals.
Yeah, you're known for buffaloes. That's another thing I'd love for you to like unpack. So kind of tell us how that thing started and what you were shooting mostly, and then what the goal of the thing was.
Well, in the Natal study, we shot everything from impala and pigs and inyala on up to our biggest animals would have been zebra and kudu.
And
basically up to, from little animals up to elk size.
That was the primary start of the study.
That was the primary start of the study.
And how did it come about? How does Ed Ashby end up being the guy who gets to do all this fun stuff that we didn't get to do?
Well, it was pure dumb luck. I had written to South Africa to see if I could hunt a rhino with a bow and arrow. And of course, the answer came back no. Bow hunting wasn't allowed. And I forgot all about it. That door's closed. And must have been 4 or 5 years later. Because I think I wrote them initially in 1980. They were sitting around the table. They had decided they wanted to do this study to look at the potential of legalizing bow hunting for economic reasons, to bring more forex into the country. But they wanted to be sure that it was effective and, you know, what needed to be done, so forth. So they called me literally on the phone. How they found my phone number, I still don't know. But they asked if I was still interested in hunting a rhino. And it was about instant to say yes.
Of course.
And so I booked a rhino hunt. And that's one of the only 2 guided hunts I ever paid for in Africa. I went over to do the rhino, and it was a 2-week hunt. And we got to talking about what they were trying to do. And after we had been discussing stuff for a while, they asked, they said, next year we're going into Makuzi Park before the rifle cull, because they have to cull a lot of animals off to keep the population in check with the habitat. And they asked if I would be interested in coming over and participating in it. Now, this is on a non-paid basis. I'd have to put all the cost myself. But they wanted to take a second rhino to see if that was a fluke. And then they wanted to go down to Makuzi and do this study there. And they wanted me to bring as many different broadheads and arrow setups that I could come up with. And so I took 34 different broadheads over and lots of different arrow shafts. And we started out once we got to Makuzu after we shot the second rhino, doing our study there. What they wanted me to do was take any shot I thought I could hit.
Angles don't matter nothing.
They wanted to see what happens with bad shooting angles.
Mm.
And we were backed up with a rifle. If it looked like there was any question that it was a lethal hit, they would put the animal down with a rifle with a shot remote from where the arrow and the arrow path was.
Mm-hmm.
And then we would dissect the animal in the field. And if we could not determine whether the shot was lethal or not, we loaded the animal up and took it back in, and they had 2 veterinarians on staff. And they would dissect the animal and tell us exactly what the shot did. And it was quite an interesting thing. And the thing about the Natal study that has always fascinated me the most, if you read the study, you'll see that even on these small animals, this 650 grain minimum arrow weight showed up as being more lethal than arrows that were below that weight. And that was across all the shots, looking at everything on them. And we had, of course, mechanicals didn't exist then. Everything was replaceable blade heads and fixed blade heads.
Mm.
And had most of the broadheads on the market at the time.
Well, 34 is a pretty good is a pretty good sample size, because you had double, and this is before the 12 factors. This is before.
Oh yeah. And we did in that initial study find out that if you had a structural failure, it was likely not a lethal shot.
No kidding.
What was the
And
reason
we
for
had
that?
a lot of those.
Was that primarily because of deflections or, placement?
Sometimes deflections. If you bend something on the arrow, it's going to redirect.
Yep.
So structural failure and that 650 grain weight, to me, were 2 of the biggest things that came out of the Natal study.
How did you end up with the head? Were you shooting your rhino arrows? You had 1,000 whatever grain arrows.
No. These were all shot with, I think my heaviest arrows were in the mid 700s.
And then you had weights all the way down.
Yeah.
Oh.
Down to what, like around 400 grains or?
Probably 450.
Okay.
All wood or aluminum?
Now we did use compound in there some. 85-pound Martin Warthog.
Mm.
And the bow didn't seem to make any difference in the outcomes.
Interesting.
We got the same thing. If the arrow failed, it tended to not be lethal.
Man, we see that today all the time.
Yep.
Like on the
And
animals.
if the arrow weight was too light, we didn't get adequate penetration. When things went wrong, adverse angle shots, heavy bones hit, your shoulder bones, things like that.
Oh, when you lose one with a modern broadhead that's made of some of that pot metal or whatever, if you lose an animal and you recover the broadhead, it's often that tip is just like bent way over or something. Blades are wrecked.
Yep.
Yeah. That's got to be a similar situation that's repeating itself.
We had a discussion yesterday, Ed. We shot some arrows through the skull of a pig and looked at the blade edges and stuff, and just really abused some arrows and broadheads. And I was talking about the fact that 2012, 2013, when I hadn't changed much of my setup, that I was getting pretty good penetration on some of these bigger pigs I was shooting. I wasn't recovering them. And looking in the rearview mirror, I think the blades were probably dulled by impact.
Worn off.
Yeah, worn off. I was taking good shot angles. I wasn't intentionally shoulder shooting them 1/4 and 2 or anything. I kind of knew for not to do that. And you get half an arrow. Pigs aren't that wide. You get half an arrow in them, it's probably through them, and they just run off. At the time, you don't know that until you look back and go, wow, maybe it's the blades are just non-lethal after going through the mud and everything on the impact side.
You know, one of the unique things about the Natal study is we got to look and autopsy the unsuccessful shots.
Yeah,
because
right.
you shot him with a rifle immediately afterwards.
Right. Yeah, Tony Thompson was backing me up with his rifle.
How many of these animals did you all kill and look at?
154 in that initial study.
Oh, wow.
That's a pretty good data set.
Oh, yeah. And what were the data points you were pulling off of each one?
Oh, I have to try to, well, I can't look back. That computer's long gone. It was an Atari with a 256K.
and the push buttons that didn't drop. They had the flat deal on top. Yeah.
Probably, I would say 70 or 80.
Holy cow.
As time went by, I expanded what I was collecting
Yeah.
on up to 119 points. And today, with our new database, we collect just over 250. And that's because there's a lot of new products on there. Every time there's a new product that's got to be tested, you got to put in all the specification fields for it and the results and so forth.
And the awesome part about this, just for the listeners here, we live in the modern world. There was no Google.
Right.
There was no laptops. There was no iPads in the field. This is hand.
Yeah, you had to write this down.
No, he's got the book.
Oh, yeah.
It's in there. It's in the house
all
somewhere.
hand recorded. I made record sheets and hand recorded all the results on there for every shot. And then when I got back to the States, I entered them in to my little Atari computer and
with the
printed it
flashing
all
cursor.
out. And then had to analyze it by hand.
And so all the graphs you made for the study and stuff was the super old school long way of doing that. It wasn't just automatic deal that we can do now.
Yeah, no automation to it. You know, I could do graphs once I had the data analyzed.
Right.
I could do a graph on that little computer.
Right.
But I couldn't do the calculations. There wasn't any, Excel spreadsheets or anything like that to work with.
Absolutely.
And once I had everything together, I wrote it up in a report form and sent it to them. And then I put it together in a more readable format and tried getting it published here in the States. And it took me forever to get it published. Most of the archery magazines at the time, because we didn't have YouTube, didn't have podcasts. Most of the archery magazines said it's African animals. It's not applicable to North American animals. What was his name? One of the archery writers back then. Anyway, he wrote me. His magazine turned it down, but he wrote me and said, "Keep after it. This needs to be published." And I did. And finally, a little magazine called Longbow picked it up and published it. After that, it got republished, got scattered around more. Interestingly enough, I had no trouble getting it published in foreign countries in foreign languages.
Really?
Yeah.
And
they were much more accepting of it.
We're just setting our ways here in the U.S.
Well, we have a pushback from the industry.
Yeah.
You know, some of the magazines were honest. They said, we can't run this. You know, our advertisers' products did not do well.
Well, and I got a question here, because you said the Natal study, this predates the 12 factors.
Oh yeah, by
so
decades.
Okay, whenever you finish this study, or as you're doing this study, like what are some of the light bulbs that are starting to go off in your head?
Well, the two, like I said, the two biggest light bulbs for me were structural integrity and error mass. And so I decided these need to be tested. And I looked for an animal where I could get a heavy bone, fairly heavy bone, up to about 0.87 inches on every hit. That's a buffalo. No other animal has that. I don't think I've ever put a shot in a buffalo that didn't hit a rib. So you're pretty much guaranteed that you're going to hit a heavy bone. So ideally is a perfect animal.
You're talking
so I
about
started working.
the thickness of the ribs, right? And you're comparing that to other animals. So most of the shots are through the ribs on these buffalo. But
Yep.
I mean, there's other bones in like a white-tailed deer that are that thick. It's just way up in the humerus bone.
Oh yeah, they're thicker and
Yeah.
they're heavier bones than a whitetail.
Well, I'm going.
Pelvic girdle, spine,
Yep.
humerus,
I'm going somewhere with this.
Okay.
femur.
A lot of people look at this information and they're like, "Oh, it's done on a buffalo."
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's something that they're not understanding is like you're looking at the buffalo ribs primarily so that you've got a constant target or somewhat constant target to test on.
Yeah.
So you're shooting into whatever that number was that you just said.
3/4 of an inch.
3/4 of an inch about, and you're trying to do that as often as possible. People just hear buffalo and they just think, oh, ginormous animal,
Mhm.
just completely different. But get down to the bone thickness here.
Mm-hmm.
And think of it in that. I think that'd be smarter for you to think of it in that terms.
Yeah.
And then how many times did you test it on that?
Well, they're big. Ed and I've talked about this when I've been at the house and stuff, just talking. They're big enough. Like those pigs are pretty good size, but you shoot them 3 times and you've disrupted the whole rib cage.
Right,
It's
yeah.
it's not sound anymore. The test starts to erode as you shoot it. Those things are enormous.
Sure.
You put a
Yeah,
lot
you
of
got a
shots
lot
in
of
it.
area to shoot
You
at.
have a lot of
on
area
buffalo.
to shoot at, and then
And then you can look and see exactly what you hit
mm-hmm.
because you can take,
Yeah.
edge of it, dead center, thick side,
Yep.
angled. And why is it important, Ed? This is important for the whole freaking world to hear. Why is it important to stop the arrow?
Well, if you don't stop the arrow, if it breaks the skin on the other side, it can't be used for comparison purposes. The medium you're penetrating has changed. You're no longer in the animal, you're in the air. So you've got a number that you can collect some data from that.
Mm-hmm.
You just can't use that data for comparison against the arrows that stop inside the animal. Now, we started out, in the early testing, I used a compound.
Mm-hmm.
And through the years, as I got better and better arrow setups, it got to the point that I broke the skin too often on the other side.
Right, just because of the velocity. Yep.
So at that point, I went back to using longbows.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, pretty heavy longbows.
Mm-hmm.
If you look towards the 2007, 2008 studies, we were using bows as low as 40-pound draw weight.
Yeah, just pushing every button you can push.
Yeah. Well, it got to the point that if I used my 94-pound bow, I had too many exits. Even with the 82-pound bow, I often had too many exit wounds.
Mm-hmm.
Could collect the data points, but couldn't use them for comparison purposes.
So I'm gonna unpack that statement a little bit just for the people that are listening, because it took me a while of hanging around with Ed to do the calculus on this. If you pick 6 broadheads, you got 18 arrows, and you're doing a comparison of broadhead. Whatever, it doesn't matter what they are. You can't measure if one broadhead passes through and one goes halfway through, the pass through doesn't count.
That's right.
You would ideally have all 6 of them get captured. That's why a 40-pound bow would be great. So all 18 of your arrows with 6 different broadheads, that's 3 shots per. One goes 2 inches further, one shorter, one's 1.5 inches further. And then you do that mathematically, and percentage-wise, you come up with the best performing penetrator. We all want a pass-through, 100%. But you can't measure, Ed, correct me if I'm wrong, you can't measure them if they don't all stop and see that they did 25% better, 15. You can't talk.
That's right.
It's not even a topic you can address. It's a pass-through doesn't tell us nothing.
Yeah, you've got to catch the error within the animal, and you've got to have enough shots to give you a valid sample.
Yeah.
You can't do one shot
Yeah, right.
and say this is what's going to happen. You need enough shots that you can figure out the average penetration, the median, and the mode.
Oh yeah, especially. I mean, that's why people stray away from it. They're like, "Well, you can never test in a constant medium." Well,
Correct.
That's why you have to. That's why you have to shoot a buffalo
That's
hundreds
right.
of times.
Every hit is its own individual action
Right.
because the bones aren't consistent. So
Yeah,
you'd
but
have to
after
do
you
Right.
just have to
You
test
can
more
hit
and more.
towards the edge of the rib. It's not as thick.
right.
Although towards the edge, you're likely to hit the edge of 2 ribs.
Right.
Mm.
If you look at a buffalo rib, the rearward rib actually has a groove along its front edge that will overlap the rib in front.
I saw that on Chris's buffalo that he shot up here.
Yeah.
I've never seen it, and they were skinning it, and he shot a water buffalo, so it wasn't an Asiatic, but nonetheless, they were. I mean, it was a wall. It was amazing. It was amazing because
Yeah, that's why it's such a perfect test animal when you're looking at what happens when you hit a heavy bone,
right,
which is your worst case scenario. You're looking for an arrow that will perform when you hit that heavy bone.
Let's just stay on the subject of the arrows here for a second. What happens when you hit a heavy bone with the 500 grain arrow or the 450 grain arrow? Do you
Now,
get
some of them, like everything else, some will breach the bone. The thing is, when you graft it out, when you get to 650 grains, every broadhead tested showed an abrupt jump in breaching the heavy bone. On the best broadheads, it jumped to 100%.
okay, yeah, you made that point. That was the point I was going. At.
Below that, those best broadheads might be at 85 to 90%, depending on the broadhead. On a really poor performing broadhead, like most 3-blade heads, they have a lot of trouble getting through bone. The percentage of getting through the bone might have been 16, 18%. And at 650 grains, it jumps to 30%. But it happened with every type of broadhead test.
There was some appreciable gain of bone penetration with every type of broadhead with a 650 grain arrow.
Yes. And it was an abrupt jump.
Just
It wasn't
like
a
that.
gradual increase. That's why I called it the heavy bone threshold, because it abruptly jumps right there.
So what were the best broadheads then in that particular test that we're talking about? We just talked about the arrows. What were
In
the
the
best
tall
broadheads
study?
and the worst broadheads? Yeah.
I had the original 190 Grizzly in there. It performed really well. There was a custom head out of Oklahoma called a Maxi head that performed pretty well. Now, for wide cut broadheads, the best performer was a Ben Pearson deadhead. Poor performing ones, most of them aren't even made today. I'm trying to think of what the
Thankfully.
names were now. I'd have to look back at the names.
But 3 blades.
They're in the right up there.
So the Grizzly became the tough head. So that thing was the beast.
Well, the Grizzly is still made,
yeah,
and Rob tested it year before last.
Mm-hmm.
It still performs well. It does not perform as well as the Tough Head because it doesn't have quite as high a mechanical advantage.
Interesting.
But it's still second to the Tough Head, the 315 grain Tough Head, or 300 grain. What? 300 grain.
Yeah.
It was the second best performing Broadhead.
And that's a single bevel.
And it's just a carbon steel Broadhead.
Mm-hmm.
On the best performing Broadheads, after they went through heavy bone, did they still maintain their edge integrity? And
well, that's something we started looking at when was that first one Rob did? 2020?
Yes.
That's when we got the best scale for measuring pre and post shot sharpness. Before that, all I could do was see, paper test, shave hair,
yeah,
that type of thing.
That's my speed.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah.
The best is truth detector. It's pretty solid.
It is, and it's quite repeatable. That's what, that was my biggest concern. But Rob tested it over and over, and it was pretty doggone repeatable. It didn't vary much.
Going back to the original study where we're talking about the arrows through the buffalo bone, the rib bones.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the original study now didn't have any buffalo in it.
Oh, right, that's right. You went to those afterwards.
Right.
What happened when you changed the bow, or you changed the poundage?
We did get some increase in penetration with the compound. It was an 85-pound compound, and I was shooting my 94-pound longbow. We didn't get as much increase as I was expecting to see, considering the kinetic energy difference.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm very curious, and we've talked about this before, but I'm very, very curious about, as you go up in speed, if the forces applied from the target increase.
Uh-huh.
Your resistance goes up by factor 4.
Okay, yeah. That's what I was
if you
curious
double
about.
The velocity, you've got 4 times as much resistance.
So
I didn't know that at the time, but that's why we didn't see the penetration increase that I would have expected.
That makes sense.
It's straight out of Newton. Like every force has an opposite and equal force, right? So the faster you go.
It's like driving down the road, put your hand out the window at 30 miles an hour, and then put your hand out the window at 60 miles an hour.
Exactly.
And feel the difference in the resistance.
That makes sense.
And that's the resistance, just to be clear for the audience, that's the resistance of the animal and whatever you hit on the target, on the arrow, trying to continue to move forward. It goes up with velocity.
Mm-hmm.
A lot. And another thing about the speed thing, I actually did a video on this, and it's upcoming, but I actually did the rough math around adding mass and how much speed reduction there actually is. And you can add, say, 50% mass, but you only lose 20% of your speed. So now your momentum jumps because of the mass. Yeah. Everybody thinks that the mass is a 1-to-1 ratio with speed. Like if you add 50 grains, you're going to pull 50 feet per second off. That is not occur. And I was a little shocked at the data that it was so much. You can add a ton of weight to an arrow, and it really doesn't lose anywhere near the amount of gain in mass.
Mm-hmm.
If you just want to do mass times velocity. The mass goes way up, and the velocity goes up at 30% of the mass gain.
Sure.
And then to this discussion about Newton, when you increase that mass, you pull your velocity down from a lighter projectile, and the resistance goes down. Squared. The math works the other way.
In your favor.
In your favor. If I'm wrong about that, Eddie, tell me.
No, that's correct.
Yeah. So if you go faster and there's more resistance mathematically, if you go slower, But you've added mass and increased momentum, less resistance.
Makes sense. Ed, you should see the slow motion footage on this high speed camera of this arrow. The lighter, faster arrow with a light,
they're just bent like a
light
banana.
mechanical.
It's
Yeah.
incredible.
You can see it just
And that increases your drag factor.
Mhm.
because
Once it's going into the tissue, it's trying to push that tissue side to side.
That's crazy. Okay, I have another question about ribs. Got another question about ribs.
ask the man.
All
I don't
right.
know, man.
Because this has got to change geographically in the U.S. I would think. Maybe it doesn't. But what's the average thickness of a whitetail rib?
Well, you want to shoot my 80-pound deer? Or you want to shoot one where you?
That's
live?
exactly what I mean. It's like, what's the average
Yeah.
thickness of a whitetail? I mean, it would
Ed,
change.
you have any spitball on that?
No, I don't.
I'll measure some, but I know our deer down here. I call them
Our
Jimmy
little
Buffett
deer
deer.
here, they're thin.
Yeah, but I mean, if you come up to Iowa and you
Correct.
shoot a 5-year-old buck,
Correct.
how thick are those ribs?
And not to mention, you got the hair, the skin, the meat.
Yeah,
Like they're just a bigger animal,
right.
by double at least
Yeah,
from what I'm used to shooting.
right,
We pick up
Oh,
our deer
more
and put them
than
in the
double.
scooter. I mean, they're nothing.
right.
You kill a 120-pound deer here, you've done something. Mosquitoes eating them up and all that stuff. But yeah, where you live, those deer are big. That one you broke the humerus on was.
Well, I mean, he's talking about 3/4 of an inch on a rib. That humerus ball that I broke on that buck.
Mhm.
I mean,
Yeah,
it
was a
went
ping- it was
right
a
through
ping
the
pong
center
ball.
of it. It's
a
at
ping pong ball.
least that big,
Mhm.
and it just split it wide open.
Yeah.
And you didn't intend to shoot him in the humerus.
Well,
ball,
hell
Aaron.
no, I didn't. But I hit him right. It split it. It did exactly what it was supposed to do. It was a 12-factor arrow.
Yeah.
It's a 660 grain arrow.
Yep.
With a solid steel or
Single
a
bevel.
solid one piece single bevel.
Yep. And you did not intend to hit that deer, and it wasn't far.
And it lodged in the offside humerus and was still shaving sharp when I pulled it out of there. So that was a light bulb moment.
Yeah.
That things were going off, but that's just one anecdotal instance of it happening. However, I have lots of anecdotal instances of it not working with other things.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm sure there's people listening to this that have their own experiences, and then you get into opinions and whatnot. But I'm very much intrigued by the heavy bone threshold.
Yeah, that's incredible.
That is what is super interesting to me.
I remember when I got to 550 before all this. No YouTube channel. I didn't know where Ed was. Nothing. I was just messing around. I was reading the study, and I was just like, what the hell do I have to lose? I'm going to try it. Right? See what happens. And when I hit 550 and a stinger, the arrows started going through them like they weren't there. There would be like smoke behind them, like a bullet. And I remember sitting in the tree stand at the Marriott going, it was only like 90-pounder, right? Comes in, broadside, shoot. And I go, what was that? Like they're not in the way. Like the arrow just said, yeah, whatever. And just kept going through. And I get messages every year of people saying, hey, I did this, hand sharpened, all that stuff. I heard the arrow hit the dirt.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't hear it hit the deer. Like it's a perfect hit. The deer goes 50 yards. Rib cage shot, nothing crazy. And they're like, I've never heard the arrow hit leaves. I thought I missed. And I heard it skipping in the leaves. And I was like, yeah, there's a certain point there where everything comes together.
Yeah.
The mass, the sharp, tuning, don't bend, don't break. And I think that's what you started to see, Ed. Obviously you started from you're basically out there screwing around trying to figure it out. And then all of a sudden things the puzzle comes together right in front of you.
Well, it took a lot of years for the puzzle to come together.
Yeah, but I mean,
I would say it was probably in the mid 1990s before the light bulb came on.
How many animals in are you then?
yeah,
By
right.
the 90s.
Thousands
Really?
of shots, not animals, but thousands of shots.
Oh, yeah, testing and all that stuff.
Yeah.
How many shots could you get out of a buffalo before you really had to kind of give up on it?
It depends on what you're doing.
Yeah.
You can get quite a lot of shots into the rib cage.
Because they're
then
big.
you can shift around and do scapular shots, angular shots. You can do things like that.
Okay.
So you can get a fair number of shots. But you have to have access to a huge number of animals.
Yeah.
And that's where I was fortunate. And when I was living in Africa, I didn't pay to hunt anything.
Yeah.
And when I got to Australia, I lucked into a situation where they were taking off of a place called the Buffalo Farm up in Kakadu. They took off 500 buffalo a year. So had lots of buffalo.
They were more than happy to have you help them out with the 500
Oh, yeah.
nitro.
Yeah.
And most of them, you would intentionally. This is another thing that nobody wants to do. So, correct me if I'm wrong after I say this. You'd have test today is angled shots. I have my arrows set up.
Oh, yeah.
I've got my trailer of stuff. I got a table. I got all the crap. I got paper to fill out. Now we go out with a rifle and find a buffalo and put it right down.
Yeah, you have to be fast because I've got a 30-minute time window before to assure that I'm not getting tissue changes.
Yeah, you don't want rigor mortis.
Down.
Mm-hmm.
So I go out with a definite plan. This is
Yeah.
what I'm going to test. These are the arrows I'm going to test. The arrows are made. The arrows are in separate cases for every test. So as soon as we've got the animal down and rolled up on his side, start shooting.
Mm.
And at the end of our 30 minutes, we stop, we go up, we start measuring, start dissecting,
Oh,
see what we've got.
Sounds like a lot of work.
It is.
Guarantee it
In
is.
brutal
Holy years.
brutal conditions with lots of bugs and heat and humidity.
Oh, good grief.
Now,
I'm in.
one of the things people don't look at and don't think about a lot is the effect of the mechanical advantage of your broadhead. Now, this really becomes important the heavier the bone gets, because the higher the mechanical advantage, the less resistance to tissue penetration you're going to have.
right.
And that is a big factor that helps you out. So if you can get that high mechanical advantage, you're going to get more work in the sense of physics out of your arrow. If you've got a 3-to-1 mechanical advantage broadhead, it takes the force of that arrow and multiplies it by 3.
So if somebody's listening to this and wants to Google a 3-to-1 mechanical advantage broadhead, what is one?
Tough head, grizzly.
Tough
Tough
head's
head.
about the only one on the market now.
That's truly 3-to-1.
What's the cutthroat 150 that I shoot?
My head and them, they're probably, I don't know, 1 to 2, I would think. 2.5 inches
It
long,
might be.
inch and an eighth
It's
wide.
what? It's what?
It's two. It's my. I'll use my head. My head's 2.25 inches long by an inch and an eighth wide. 2.5.
Yeah, about 2.
So we're talking here
You're
about
doubling the force of your arrow.
we're here talking about broadheads that are shaped like this, but they're that long
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
versus that
Yep.
mechanical advantage, which is
Yes.
blunt. It's one of the reasons why I'm just going to be a self-promoting idiot here, but I refuse to make a 125 or a 150. I asked the guys at Sirius to build me the longest 200 grain broadhead because it seemed to be a weight that wasn't scaring people off, and just make it as long as we possibly could, keep the thickness up, and that's why we could have sold a bazillion 125s.
Well, the only way for the cutthroat to get a 150 with a slightly higher MA is to take those grooves out of it.
Mm-hmm.
That's why there's little bathtub grooves in it or whatever that's removing the weight.
Yeah, but I didn't want it to go. My head's not long and skinny, but it's long and skinny. But the only way to make them lighter is take the length out of them.
Yep.
We stretched it on all kind of 3D programs, and it just got too thin.
Yep.
And it would be nice to be able to have a bunch of money to test how thin you could go before it started to collapse, and maybe you could get away with it, right? But that's an expensive deal.
I got more questions about the bones.
That's the man right there.
You said you changed some of the tests to shoot angles and to shoot
Yes.
different bones. What
Yes.
What happened whenever you went up in bone depth? Like say you go from from rib cage hits to scapula hits. What were the findings there?
That's where you start separating out the really good performing broadheads from the ones that don't perform so well. Because when you do scapula shots, you've got ribs behind. You've got this solid wall of ribs behind that on a buffalo.
That's right.
So you're going through the scapula, and then there's the rib barrier. So you've got two barriers to try to get through. Now, up until, what was it, last year before last, I didn't know if it was possible for an arrow to break the ball joint of a Cape buffalo until Rob did it.
How thick is that roughly?
5 inches.
Holy crap, you're kidding.
Just like your bone on your deer, he split one.
That's,
And it was a hunting shot, right?
That's a
He was
softball.
hunting. He wasn't. That wasn't a
He
test
was
shot.
hunting. That was on a hunting shot.
A hunted
Yeah.
shot. It was a live buffalo. He shot at a water hole, hit a little low, didn't intend to hit there. He wasn't trying to shoot the
Nope.
humerus ball.
That wasn't what he was trying to do.
He was not trying. He was trying
but
to
it
just kill
broke
the
the,
buffalo.
broke the buffalo down.
that was
Yeah.
the lead.
He
That
did
was the
put another arrow in it to finish it off, but
Oh,
it broke
okay.
him down.
Yeah, he didn't run off. It broke his front. Like, he was broken down right there.
I'll be darned. Did it get into the chest cavity?
I don't remember.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it went on through the rib.
But I want to make sure a lot of people don't have a physiology background, and this is completely undiscussed. Every animal on the planet, including you, has ribs behind the scapula.
Yep.
It's one of the reasons why scapula hits are really hard. So ribs are very flexible.
Mm-hmm.
They actually have a little notch in them with cartilage in there to make them even more flexible. If your ribs were not flexible, you could not breathe. It is that simple. Okay, you'd have a lead chest on and it wouldn't move. So you have a scapula, you have ribs behind it. It's layered. So you go meat, pretty thick meat. The shoulder's meat is thicker than the rib cage. You impact the scapula. Whatever happens, it's going to push down onto ribs that are flexible, and it's just going to go, just constantly try to, and then you got to breach them both and keep going. And that's the thing a lot of people understand. We're not telling you to intentionally shoot a shoulder shot. We're talking about when that happens out of a tree stand, the barrier of this combination of layer, meat, I call it the catcher's mitt. That's kind of my visualization of it. Like, it just flexes in, and here comes the baseball, right? All these layers, and then he's shooting a buffalo with a great big shoulder blade and a 3/4 inch rib right behind it.
Right.
And if it doesn't breach both, it's just a piece of metal stuck in a buffalo.
Yeah, and these examples we're talking about, these hunting examples, and in my case and in Rob's case, he's not trying to hit there.
No,
That's just
nobody's trying to hit there.
Yeah, that's how all the hits happen for the most part. So
That's
you're
right.
not trying, but I want to know what the hell happens when I do hit there. So, I'm very interested in those tests where you went into 4-wheel drive through the bones, and which heads performed and which arrows performed. The 650 threshold still held up there, I'm assuming.
It manifests everywhere. It's a matter of the percentage penetration that it gets. There's still that bone jump.
Every broadhead
Now,
still bone
some
jumps.
broadheads,
Yeah.
you're not going to get through a buffalo rib or buffalo ball joint.
Yeah.
You're going to have a hard time with some deer.
Yeah.
The 3-blade heads are the worst bone penetrators.
And does that go for solid heads and replaceable blade heads?
Doesn't matter.
Any 3-blade
Any
design.
3-blade. It's just difficult to get a bone to split in 3 directions.
Yeah, wedges in there.
4-blade does better than a 3-blade.
A 4 does.
Bonehead.
Really?
Well, it has an opposing edge.
Okay.
So the 3 blades got a blade up here and 2 like that. It turns into a wedge the minute it hits the bone. Whereas
Yeah, most of them on buffalo stop in the ribs with a 3-blade.
so the 3 blade turns into a wedge, whereas the 2 blade or a double bevel, at least the other side has force. They're cutting in the same direction, like that. You're shooting with a 3 blade. You're shooting a triangle at a bone.
Right.
It would have to split it in 3 directions.
Makes sense.
and it just wedges. Not to mention they all stop rotating at impact.
Did you test just straight double bevels on the quartering angles through the?
Yes. Yeah, we did that.
But they did not perform as well as the high.
They don't perform as well as single bevel.
Okay.
The rotation of the single bevel helps you split that bone. Now, you're going to have to get into that bone deep enough to get that rotation to pop it. Most people don't realize how little energy an arrow has to work with. The very highest energy compound bow produces less energy than a 22 long rifle. Now, a 22 is not legal to hunt deer in any state. A 22 rimfire.
Right, and body shots with a 22 rimfire are completely irresponsible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's just not even a practical thing to do. It's not.
That's what I'm interested in. What's the heavy bone threshold with like my modern compound bow and my modern arrows and my single bevel heads?
Mm-hmm.
But that's the thing. You see so many guys that are in that 550-ish range with arrow weight that are using single bevels.
Mm-hmm.
And that's got to be better than a lot of the alternatives out
100%.
there.
He'll say
But-
It is. Yeah.
But
It will have a higher percentage breaching rate, but it's not going to be 100%.
you've got to get
There are going to be hits. It's not going to breach the bone.
Gotcha. But for most of in the deer situations, that's why I'm thinking about like the bone
Yeah.
depths and things of these various deer that we're
Mhm.
hunting across the country.
Mm-hmm.
When you go to the full 12 factors, that's when you're going to have. That's whenever you got into the 100%,
Yeah.
and we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of data points.
Yeah.
And on top of that, my hunted animals.
Yeah.
I always used what the study was showing as my best arrow setup. And the last 25 years that I hunted, I had 631 animals, 4 of which were not recovered. Careful arrow selection is the key to killing animals.
And
Just like that.
what was your shot distance on a lot of those, and like your shot selection?
The average distance worked out to 15.97 yards.
Guess what?
We just talked about that yesterday.
Ed, take a guess at what our average shot distance is with our deer that we've killed with a bow.
16 yards.
16 yards. You're 100% right.
The ones you've killed.
The ones we've killed.
Killed-
I figured it up.
Killed is a great
Yep.
word there.
Yeah.
Killed.
And he just said like 15.97.
And he stalked.
Yeah.
He didn't tree hunt much or anything like that. He was
No, that was stalking. There was probably maybe 5 or 6 animals out of that whole number that was shot from an elevated position.
Okay. And are most of these you're waiting for broadside shots, or are you taking a wide array of angles?
No! Once I knew I had arrow setups that would take the size of animal I was after from any angle, I shot them from any angle. It's a real advantage to be able to stalk an animal from the rear end.
Yeah. No doubt.
That makes sense. They're not looking at you.
Yeah.
Obviously.
I've shot a couple of pigs right between the back legs, and there's nothing there. The arrow just disappears. I mean, it doesn't make even a sound.
Yep.
Just full length skewer them. It gets wild.
Yeah, but that's the thing. That's the interesting part is like you'd done the testing on the same animals a lot of times. So you're
I was taking the results from the buffalo,
okay.
knowing how much penetration I was getting on a buffalo, even when heavy bones were hit. I could pretty much extrapolate that to what was going to happen when I shot water hogs, impalas, zebras, kudus,
Yeah.
elands, anything.
I've never been able to pull
get
that.
an idea of what's going to happen.
All of our conversations, Ed, I've never been able to pull that out of you. That is what an incredible way to bow hunt is to say, okay, well, I've been shooting 1,800-pound animals for testing. I'm going to go shoot a whitetail deer.
Yeah. You know that.
It's not. It's
imagine
going
the
to
amount.
penetrate.
That's the thing is, imagine the amount of confidence you have when you get one quarter into you at 14 yards or whatever after you've done all that testing and you've seen it work.
Yeah,
100% of the time.
Hundreds of times.
Yeah, hundreds of times.
Right.
Then you're like, this is no big deal. This is no problem. I'm going to put the arrow where it needs to be in order to kill the animal.
Right.
I'm not going to worry about bones or whatever.
Right, but I'm going to make this point, and I might make it later. That's a 12-factor system.
Yeah.
It is not, and unfortunately, in this discussion, around these discussions, the broadheads are the most often thing that is, the mass is the first thing that goes. Nobody wants to shoot the heavy mass. And the second thing is they're trying to find some magic broadhead that theoretically is going to be 125 grains this long, that wide, and still do what Ed's talking about.
Right.
And when this is a thing that is completely misunderstood. When this man says the era, which I've stolen era. I don't say arrow anymore. And forever I'm saying era because I love it. That era.
That's Texan.
Yeah, that's Texan for arrow. Has a 3-to-1 broadhead. It's got all the stuff. It's got the FOC up. It's got a lot of mass.
What's number one?
What's number one? Perfect arrow fly.
Perfect arrow fly.
And structural integrity. Structural integrity is number one.
Structural integrity is number one. Number two is perfect arrow fly.
Absolutely.
Gotcha.
It can fly a little weird, but
if something breaks on your arrow, all bets are off.
Yep.
Yeah. Performance goes in the toilet.
But number two is perfect arrow flight.
And in the limited amount of animals I've shot with the full system, which I have 6 of them that are JB welded together. They have tapered inserts inside the tough edge. You can't get them apart. They don't unscrew. They're 715 grains, bare shafted, feathers on the back, so they're highest FOC I can get. And they're 250, so they're pushing about 26%, 25.5. They're just like the lasers. Like there's nothing. It just goes chut. It's hard to believe. Everybody just thinks I'm some kind of like when I talk like this, I'm some kind of like just beat my own horse and make sure everybody understands that I think this is a great idea. And then you see it 8 times, and you're just like, those arrows don't even know stuff's there. I said that earlier when I got to 550 was the first time on a small pig I saw dust behind the deal, but they're just they just go through stuff. Of all the deer you've shot, I don't know, in the last 5 or 6 years, you've probably killed 10 or 12 deer, 15. You made one mistake. And thank God you had the right arrow, because that was not a small, that's the deer, your audience, which we're talking to, never wants to lose.
Well, here's the rub.
Great big 10 point.
You're talking to thousands of bow hunters that are hunting whitetails, and your average guy like me is going to bust their butt to try to get an opportunity to mature buck.
Yeah.
And if you do that, you put the effort in, realistically, you might get one a year.
Really, yeah.
So it's like your amount of,
effort.
Yeah, that determines your outcome. But it's so much of a different animal than the does that you're shooting in the young bucks. It's like that big pig that came in last night. It's literally almost twice the size of the of the rest of the deer in the woods.
Yeah.
I mean, this thing is an anomaly out there.
Yeah, yeah.
He's magnum.
Yeah.
And people just don't have the experience to give them the confidence to be able to make these decisions.
Yeah.
Like what we're talking about with you, Ed, you tested it on all those things. So when these animals come in, or when you stocked up on them, you knew what to expect because you'd seen it all. People just, they read all this stuff on internet or whatever, watch this and watch this guy talk about this, and then they just have these expectations in their head that this is how it's going to go, but they don't in reality have a ton of experience shooting at mature bucks.
It's hard to get
because you just don't. Yeah, if you hunt them really, really hard for 10 years in an average guy situation like what I'm talking about, you might get a half a dozen legitimate opportunities at a mature buck.
Yeah, right.
What you've got to go on is maybe what you saw happen on the 3 does that you killed or whatever, if you're just sticking to your own experience.
And your point here is the bones, you're talking about bone structure that isn't anything.
It is not the same.
Yeah.
It's not. So, if you shoot your 520 grain arrow with your single bevel broadhead and you just slice through the first 6 deer you killed, that's all well and good. But if they're all does and young bucks, what happens when the big boy comes in and he quarters slightly to you in the brush and you can't really tell, and you put it where it needs to go.
And you might hit a stick on the way there.
You might hit a stick on the way there, anything. I mean, you're hunting. Yeah. So you hit it, and you hit the ball, the humerus ball.
Accidentally.
Yeah, yeah. That's a different bone structure than the other 6 that you shot. So see, you're going the opposite direction of where Ed was going.
Yeah, right.
Ed went up and then down,
and
had the confidence as he went down. Now you're going from does up to a buck that you have no idea what it's about to do. That's why I'm fascinated by the heavy bone threshold, especially for modern equipment.
Well,
with these broadheads,
of all the guys, you're the only one who's really split something like that.
That's the only one. But that's my point is, I can show you what happened on that one, and it gives me tremendous confidence because it worked to a T exactly how you guys said it would.
Yeah.
But it's the only one.
Right.
And I want more people to go into their hunting with that mindset. It's like when you shoot something and you're able to recover it, just look in there and see what in the hell happened. What does your broadhead look like if you can recover it? You know, what organs did it hit? What happened to the bone that you hit? Did it split? Did the arrow deflect? And that, luckily with us, where we film everything, you know, with some of these high-speed cameras and stuff, we can see these
the impact
various
flex and all that.
Impact flexes. And a lot of people don't have that luxury. But I think that's the thing, is we're just starved for data.
Correct.
You know, in the U.S. on these animals, because to your point earlier, Ed, that's a lot of the same criticisms that you were getting in the magazine days are the same ones we face in modern times, where it's like, oh well, that doesn't apply to North American animals. Rib bone's rib bone, and they vary. And like you said, every animal on the earth has them.
Every animal of the same size doesn't have the same bone structure.
Yeah, and that's just the rub, though, is. And like he said, he was fortunate enough to test all these things. I want to know how we do this, how we continue to do this in modern times.
Yeah, that's what the foundation's doing. Rob's going to Australia this year. He's going in the summer. He's going in the next couple of weeks, right? Rob?
No, I think he's going in the fall. I think September.
But he's going to a big.
I'm not sure of that.
You're doing the Buffalo repeat. So the foundation's he's shooting an 80-pound compound. And we're repeating a lot of the study at the high macro level right now, not into the weeds yet, but with a compound. And so far, well, I know a couple of Rob's arrows are in Africa still because they went through Cape Buffalo, fly through them, and went in the woods, and the trackers couldn't find them.
Yeah, he lost several arrows that way.
Yeah.
Can you imagine shooting through a Cape Buffalo like it was nothing? That's awesome.
The one he shot in Argentina, he used a 650 grain arrow. He got a perfect broadside shot, and he killed the buffalo. But then, buffalo down, he took his test shots. It's not enough. It'll breach the bone, but it doesn't have enough residual energy after that to continue on.
When he did a hard impact.
That's why my buffalo arrows were, I guess the lightest I ever had was maybe 790 grains. Most were in the 850 to 900 grain range. But I shot that arrow for every animal I hunted from rabbits on up.
Well, if I remember, his Argentina buffalo, they're bigger. That's the biggest one on the planet, right? That's
they are. They're the biggest.
They're the biggest on the. He didn't shoot
body size. Yes.
He didn't shoot the tough head either. If I remember right, I think.
No, he didn't. He didn't.
He shot a 200 grain broadhead like mine.
Yeah.
On the biggest buffalo on the planet, 650 grains, bare shaft, fletched with feathers, higher FOC.
And it was a plan A shot.
It was a perfect hit.
And it worked.
And it was adequate. It didn't just fly through. So if any little thing, to your point, would have happened, he might have got stomped.
Yep.
Because those things, I understand, have a pretty bad attitude.
Oh, yeah. Buffalo all have a chip on their shoulder.
Biggest thing out there. One of the craziest things I've seen, I think it may have been posting Cess Buffalo. I've seen 2 videos where Cape Buffalo jumped the string. Like you see them shoot and you see them just go like this, right? They just tuck up.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what in the hell does he have to worry about? It's a Cape Buffalo. What's he doing? Like someone's going to attack him? But I saw him.
Well, they do have to worry about lions.
Yeah, I guess so.
Lions will attack them.
Oh, I don't want to be playing with lions.
That's about it.
That would be tough.
Interesting.
Do you have any more questions, Aaron? Other than your head spinning?
I have a million questions, but yeah, this is all fascinating stuff to me.
Well, like we've gone over this a couple of times on that deer, but when you sent me, so Ed, this deer we're talking about, he kills a great big 10-point Midwest deer, very close range. He's on the ground with him. Arrow hits a stick he did not see, hits the humerus, cuts it in half, and penetrates through, and the deer went 70. Maybe how far to go down that hill?
Oh, 60, 70 yards. It snapped the whole front leg.
Yeah,
like the top of the humerus.
when
I got to him, I picked up the leg and it just completely turned over the deer. And then it didn't have enough energy to get through the other leg on the other side. Mm-hmm. The broadhead stopped there, but it went through that and into the chest cavity, hit the front of the heart and all the arteries and stuff that come off the top of it. And he bled mostly internally.
Yeah.
But it lodged in the offside, and then this first step he took, he just sheared that arrow off.
Yeah.
But that much arrow was in there, lodged in him. Now, like you said earlier, in some instances with other equipment, you might get the same level of penetration through the hide.
Correct.
But the broadhead shears off, it deflects, it snaps on impact, dulls, whatever. In this case, the broadhead worked just like the tool that it is, that single bevel twisted and it popped that humerus. The humerus ball looked like that potato that you did with the test.
Yeah, right. That was his test.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was split right in half. It was beautiful. Like Rob's Cape Buffalo, he hit it dead center.
Yeah.
And it was just perfectly broken. It wasn't a cut in there like yours. It was broken. It's amazing. Just in half. 2 pieces, just like yours. But it was
I'll be darned.
Is that big around.
Yeah.
Unbelievable performance. Unbelievable.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Fortunately, he had the right arrow for the job.
Yeah, at that time. And like we said about 15 times, he wasn't trying to hit it, neither were you.
Right. And I don't know if I'd have had the arrow that I have out there right now, if it would have done the same thing. Because I got a 560 grain arrow on there right now.
Yeah.
Which the reason I'm shooting it is just because of number 2. Because I put it on there and it was shooting perfect.
Yep.
Perfect flight. So I didn't want to compromise that. And that's what I started hunting with since the last batch. But I'm getting ready to go hunt elk, and most of the elk shots that I get are close range and thick brush. I mean, it's the same deal, 15-yard shots.
And the angles aren't guaranteed.
The angles are super wonky.
Yeah.
But yeah, very interesting. Very interesting.
Okay,
stuff.
Ed, we're going to move on to bullet testing.
All right.
Lots of gunfire this afternoon. Zach has a 300 Weatherby. I'm going to watch him blow his shoulder off with it. It'll be delightful to watch. I'm old enough that I go, yeah, you can shoot that. That'll be a joyous time. Give me a 22 long rifle. I'll just keep thinking away.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Ed, for jumping on with us, and I'll see you soon.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Ed.
All right.
Appreciate it.
See you.
Most welcome.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.